I am freshly back from a trip to Paris. Well, fresh isn't quite the right word. I'm pretty jet lagged, but I'm inspired, definitely inspired. I love Paris. What a tease, though, from a photography standpoint. I barely shot anything because I took my wife there for her birthday. She had never been before. I had, so it was really all about her. Some shots of her, I guess. But man, I wanted to shoot. Everything was inspiring. That said, the trip was a success. I did pick up 3 new versions of my favorite Docker hats from Baton Cerise. Went to this little boutique shop. It was like a mecca of Docker hats. I got a killer fancy coat that was overpriced like a Leica. You gotta blend in Paris. Everyone dresses so fancy. I wanted to blend in. And oh yeah, I saw a bunch of famous art museums, and I destroyed a ridiculous number of pastries and baguettes, as one does. Okay, enough Paris talk. Today's episode of my Leica Files takes us back to my first project after returning to shooting with a Leica in 2019 with my beloved Leica M10-D and my Leica 35 Summilux lens. This wasn't just another assignment or photo story. It became the most meaningful project of my career, I would say. It's produced some of my best work and reinforced why I'm so committed to long-form documentary storytelling. Quick sponsor shout out before I get into today's episode. A thank you to Wotancraft for sponsoring this episode, for making my channel possible. They make the best camera bags. Period. Nothing else to say. I use their flagship pilot series for this project in particular. I still use it for all my assignments. I've got a whole wall of fame there of camera bags. I'm a camera bag nerd. They make the best camera bags. They make the best bags in general. They're low-key, they're durable, modular, and stylish all at the same time. If you're interested in a bag, don't go buy it because I said so, but if you're in the market for a bag, use the affiliate link in the description box below. And this series right here has had like a little bit of a renaissance, if you will. My Leica Files series is me rummaging through my archive. I go through Dropbox, I pull out an assignment, pull out a story, or I pull out a commercial shoot, and I share the images. I give you some insights from that assignment and give you some tips along the way. So for today's episode, we'll go back to 2019 when I flew to central Kenya to document the last 2 Northern White Rhinos left in the entire world. In this episode, I'll break down how the story came to be, the gear I used, which I've already mentioned, but I'll give you the why I chose that gear. I'll share with you my favorite images, and I'll talk about how this project ended up in a global Leica ad campaign, and also published in multiple major publications. And at the end, I'll share with you the trailer for my documentary about this story, which is now being shopped around to film festivals, so I can't show you the whole thing, but eventually I will. And I'll end with a bit of controversy that I've struggled always with how much to share about this. But I'll end with that because I think it's important to be transparent. I think you guys can learn something from that. So I'll share that with you at the very end. So this wasn't an assignment like the other episodes that I've done. This wasn't a commercial project. This was a personal project. And I'll talk a little bit about personal projects because they're important to me. I think they're important to everyone, pros and amateurs. And you don't need to be a seasoned pro with a stacked resume to start a big project. So this personal project happened for me right after I turned 40 years old. I was deep into commercial work and less time for my photojournalism work because it wasn't as frequent, it didn't pay as well, and I was doing almost no personal work. Personal projects had always defined me. They shaped my style because they were pure. They were what I wanted to shoot and how I wanted to shoot it. And while I was growing through all my commercial work, growing through all my assignments, I hadn't really grown as a long-form storyteller. And I wanted to get back to that. I wanted to do projects that I was passionate about and do them my way. So this essentially was me returning to my roots. My early personal projects launched my editorial career, eventually making me a regular contributor to the New York Times, covering assignments all around Southeast Asia, working for a bunch of other magazines as well. And so I was looking for like this legacy project, this long-term project, something I could grow into. And I've always been drawn to wildlife and conservation. And so I decided to focus on documenting people who dedicate their lives to helping animals and focusing on capturing that bond between humans and animals. And I remember seeing a story about the last male Northern White Rhino dying in 2018 and leaving behind only 2 Northern White Rhinos, mother and daughter, and both females. And I thought, like, what a perfect story to launch this project. And so from idea to execution was quite complicated. I had little experience in wildlife photography, but a ton of work in documentary and assignment photography. But this wasn't about photographing animals from afar with a long lens. It's not what I wanted to do. I respect for that, but that's not what I wanted to do. But this story was about wildlife photojournalism, which is quite different than wildlife photography. This was about telling an intimate, ethical story about the human-animal bond, not just like beautiful pictures of animals. And so to gain access for this, I just hit the ground running. I reached out on Instagram, I reached out on email to the communications team at the conservancy where the rhinos lived. That was located in central Kenya. I shared my website, my intentions, and kind of how I needed to work and how much time I needed. I wasn't looking to come for a day or two. I needed weeks, full days of shadowing and documenting. No scripting, just real, accurate moments. I could have pitched this story to publications like the New York Times or other publications I work for, and that could have helped with expenses. And honestly, that crossed my mind. Having a major outlet backing me would have helped made access easier, or often it does, sometimes it doesn't. But this was a personal project. I didn't want a writer or an editor shaping my narrative or publication limiting my time. I wanted full control of this because, like I said before, I wanted to do a long form story. I didn't want to be limited by parameters of you need a lead shot. This is the amount of shots we need for the layout or for the website. I wanted time to really experiment and grow, and enough time to get depth in my story, spend time and wait for moments, and experiment with my narrative and experiment with my style of photography. And so I took the harder path, self-funded, no guaranteed outcome, not so appealing to the people there, I can imagine. Just me, my camera, and my commitment. I leaned on my resume, emphasized my passion for long-form storytelling, and it wasn't easy. It took a lot of back and forth. It took persistence and some negotiations. And they were lovely, but it's a matter of trust. Like, they have other people going there, and, it's trust, and it just took time. And to any of you out there thinking of starting a personal project, don't let imposter syndrome hold you back, but also don't be naive. Experience, credibility, and a strong body of work, that helped me. It definitely helped me. It definitely pushed me over the edge. But I built that brick by brick. And so me exchanging my images for access, it's going to be easier for me than someone that doesn't have that experience and doesn't have those big name clients behind them. So if you're just starting, do the same. You earn trust. You earn trust by putting in the time, putting in the work, and building a track record. So for this project, I did a complete reset of my kit. I invested in a Leica M10-D. When I saw this camera being launched, it had just come out. It was appealing to me. It's a digital camera without a screen. And as a person that works fast, talks fast, even today, like, my nature is to talk fast, I've had to consciously slow down. It helps in my journalism work. It helps in my assignment photography. It even helps in my commercial photography to be able to work fast, think fast, talk fast. But for this project, I wanted to take a breath. I wanted to slow down. And I needed some help to do that. I needed to not be looking at my camera screen constantly. So I tested out the Leica M10-D in Singapore with the help of Leica Singapore. And I fell in love with it, and I decided to use it for this project and for all my personal projects moving forward, and I still have to this day in 2025. And so I paired that camera with a Leica 35 Summilux, my favorite lens for pure documentary. It's just a great focal length for me to get detail shots, reportage-style shots, and even environmental portraits. And I use that all with my Wotancraft Pilot Series bag, which I talked about before. And so I packed, I planned, I showed up, and I documented. At the Conservancy, when I showed up, I met the caretakers. That was the idea, is to tell the story through the caretakers there. And so they introduced me to the head caretaker named Zachariah. And now Zachariah has been documented quite a bit, but back then there wasn't many people doing his story. And he was shy at first, maybe just because of his English. He wasn't that confident in it. His English was fantastic, but he wasn't that confident. And this is the reason why I wanted to go there and why everyone should spend a little bit of time in this stories. People tend to open up when they see you're genuine in your intentions or you invest time in them. And he was wonderful. I mean, he was so passionate about the rhinos, so passionate about the work he was doing. And he spends more time with the rhinos than he does with his own kids. He's 21 days on working with the rhinos, staying there right on location in a little village there. And then he travels a few hours back to see his family a few days a month. And they also introduced me to another caretaker named Peter, who was also a dedicated figure, a very visual person, very nice person. And so I decided to just document them both. Over time, Zachariah told me that most photographers only come there for a few days, and there I was going to be there for several weeks. And so I split my time between him and Peter, learning the rules, earning their space, moving slowly, watching the caretakers, taking cues from them, respecting the rhino's side and speed. They're a lot faster than you think. And the key overall was just patient, observing, and really just being there, being present. My morning started every day at 4 a.m. I wanted to be there for sunrise. I wanted to start my day when they started their day. So I had gross instant coffee every morning, gear in the car. I stayed about 30 minutes within the Conservancy at this little campsite. I would drive and meet Zachariah at first light, like always the back. I'll never forget this. Every morning, the outline of Mount Kenya there, where I would greet Zachariah and he'd let me in. I'd follow him into the enclosure and he'd let the rhinos out to graze. And I'll never forget, I should have said this earlier, but I never forget that moment, the first day when I met Zachariah and I met the girls, so, Fatu and Najeen. They call them the girls. And I'll just never forget that moment of just like walking up to them and getting so close to them. And it's just hard to describe in words. It was so emotional. I'm even emotional thinking about it to this day. And that's the other thing about stories that are meaningful to you. They never go away. If you're a visual person, they especially never go away because you're always sort of looking through your archive and organizing these images. And so they're always like present in your life. And right there, when I showed up, I had just deep moment because I'll never forget about 10 years earlier doing a story undercover about the illegal wildlife trade and holding a severed rhino horn and then being in front of these rhinos 10 years later. And eventually during that trip, like actually touching the rhino horn attached to Fatu and Eugene, and just, yeah, it's just sad and powerful and incredible. And so having time was key. It was a key to everything. It's a key to all personal projects. I could refine my shots daily. If the shadows weren't right one morning, or I didn't get the shot the way I wanted to, I could just adjust the next day because they did the same thing every single day. If a portrait idea surfaced but the light was off, I would just make a note and try it again in better light. And for weeks, it was just the same thing every day. I would get up at 4 a.m., I'd meet Zachariah, I'd shoot all day, I'd get back to my room at 7, have dinner, and just review my images, see what worked, see what didn't, start to sequence the story, put it together, see, do I have an establishing shot, or is this moment good, or is this little series of images working together as a series? Another really hard challenge for this project, sounds weird, is that yes, there's only 2 Northern White Rhinos left, but there was a third rhino, not a Northern White Rhino, that lived with them in this enclosure. And she, I have to frame it. The story's about having 2 left, and she was always in the images because she tended to hang out with the youngest rhino. And so the mother and daughter didn't typically graze together. And so it was really hard. That's why having this time was important because, I couldn't take the picture of the other rhino. It would just be confusing from a visual narrative standpoint. So although Zachariah told me, like, he's like, you have no idea. You're one of the few people actually had the journalistic integrity to not show pictures of Tawa and claim it was one of the Northern White Rhinos. And so while they were long days, I mean, typically I would stop for just like lunch in the afternoon. I would just and I'd shoot through bad light, good light, everything. But I've never been happier. I've never been happier than shooting this type of work. It's meaningful to me. It's powerful to me. And it didn't feel like work at all. It's just full on days. And I did the same thing for weeks. I fell into a routine. And that's sort of my happy place. And now, as far as the impact of a story like this, because you hope your stories can have an impact, especially personal work, this was the most meaningful project of my career, or at least one of them. It produced some of my best work, and more importantly, it made an impact in a way. The story ran multiple times in the Washington Post. It ran in a bunch of other global magazines. It reached a bunch of different areas all over the world. And it even was featured in a global ad campaign for Leica. And that was great too, because that just reaches an entirely different audience. And that happened because I was always posting and tagging, and I think I shared the image on LFI or I shared it on my Instagram. And an ad agency that was doing this global ad campaign for Leica, they saw the image and they purchased it for global use. Now, this doesn't always happen, and barely ever do I recuperate my expenses for a personal project like this. That's not the goal, that's not the intention, and it doesn't typically happen. This was a rare case that maybe I broke even, but typically on this kind of project, I lose money, but that's also fine with me. I also donated the images to the Conservancy. That also led to me becoming a global ambassador for an NGO called Helping Rhinos. And so the images were used constantly for fundraising and conservation efforts, and that made me happy. I mean, it's just another way to make an impact with the images. And after the first trip, I returned 2 more times, building a bond with Zachariah and a relationship with the rhinos that's hard to really explain. You can see I have a tattoo. No one likes to talk. No one likes to hear about other people's tattoos, but it's obviously meaningful to me enough to ink it on my body. And then my latest visit, a couple years back, I filmed a documentary, and I worked with a friend of mine who's a director, and it took a while to put this all together, but it's a short documentary. It's currently on the film festival circuit, which means because there are rules, I can't show it to you guys yet, but at the end of this, I will share the trailer. And I'll end with sort of the ugly truth, the thing I told you guys about, the controversy. I wouldn't be honest if I didn't acknowledge some of the challenges that came with this project and potentially could come with your projects if you're an amateur or a pro. A major publication and their photographer were extremely protective of the story, so much so that they resorted to like unethical and frankly disappointing tactics to try and prevent me from continuing my work. Yeah, it was really fake. It was really nasty. And I happened to read some emails that I wasn't meant to read, and I saw this. And then I just had to deal with a lot of we'll just call them shady tactics and disappointing tactics. And I won't name names, and I don't know if the magazine is really complicit. I know they're complicit in buying a story and wanting access and the pressure they put on. And I know the photographer themselves is also like really passionate about this project and does a great job promoting it. However, no one owns a story. It's not exclusive. And the more eyes on the story, the better, I think. Reaching more audiences and different audiences is important. But I'll say that our industry, and the reason I'm glad that I'm 1 foot in, 1 foot out, because I'm not beholden to it, and I don't care. And that prevents me from being bullied. But I understand for a lot of people out there, it's tough. It's tough to speak up. And it's easy to be bullied. But often this industry, the photojournalism industry, can prioritize exclusivity over the bigger picture, raising awareness for the actual cause. And it was frustrating and quite honestly, just disheartening. And in addition to that, there's also copycats. One from that same photographer I mentioned that had actually been there before me several times, and then magically, after seeing my work, had brand new compositions that really mirrored mine and that somehow they didn't see on their other trips, on their previous visits. And it wouldn't have bothered me if they weren't so nasty, actually. I probably wouldn't have cared. But someone sent me a side-by-side comparison, and I'm not one of those photographers that feels they own a type of picture composition. And I'm logical to know that any photographer going to a place like this, they will most certainly have crossover in shots and composition and even moments. But it was just way too close for my liking. And the fact they didn't capture that on all their other trips was really just like too much of a coincidence. And then there was another less experienced photographer who I knew followed me as well and had gone there after me. And let's say they borrowed a lot of my images, a lot of my work. One of them even won an award for their image series that, to put it mildly, bore an uncanny resemblance to mine. I won't lie, it stung, but I can always stand by my raw files and timestamps, and ultimately I need to recognize that while talking deeply about this could be helpful for the industry, it also takes away from the story about the rhinos and the work being done to save the Northern White Rhinos from extinction. And so I've stayed away about publicly addressing this in detail. But the higher road, honestly, isn't always easy to travel, I must admit it. But these are things that are important to mention, and I like sharing with you guys these kind of things, and you could run into these things as well. And so if there's one takeaway from this, is don't let bigger names or publications intimidate you. If your motives are good, and if you're coming from the right place, just keep pushing forward. And that's what I did. It wasn't easy, but I kept pushing forward. Stay ethical, stand by your work, and the rest will fall into place. And it has for me. And most importantly, all that other stuff aside, all that controversy aside, is don't forget to take time for your legacy projects, whether you're an amateur or a pro. Never mind any big names or publications behind you. Yes, it's hard to get access sometimes, but we've all got to start somewhere and just build it brick by brick. And just think deeply about a project and start emailing people, and don't be discouraged if it doesn't happen overnight. And most importantly, just go out there and shoot. Hope you guys enjoyed this episode. Thank you guys for tuning in. Don't forget to check out those Woven Craft bags. If anyone's interested in my workshops or one-on-one learning through my online photography educational platform, askmott.com, you can book everything there. If you guys have any questions about this project, let me know in the comments section. Anything you want to share, just ask me. I'll do my best to answer them in the comments section below. Thank you guys for tuning in. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe, and don't forget to have a wonderful day.
One whose mind is enmeshed in sympathy for friends and companions neglects the true goal. Seeing this danger and intimacy, wander alone like a rhinoceros. Having let go of passion, aversion, delusion, having shattered the fetters, undisturbed at the ending of life, wander alone like a rhinoceros.